Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode number 16 of SteeleWatching Season 1. Steele crazy after all these years, and I want to break into a Paul Simon song.
It's the name of my autobiography. Or it would be if I had one.
Let's get some episode details on this.
Wait.
And this is going to get a little bit...
Who are you?
Oh, I don't know. I am Eric. I am one of the presenters / hosts / announcers.
And I am Sara, and I am the token Canadian. I don't know. Oh.
It's been one of those weeks, folks. What can we say?
All right. Now we know who we are.
Yeah. Anyway, let's get into the details. It is going to get a little ugly, and I'm going to have to do some confessing. Yes, another confession from your host. Okay, this episode first aired on February 18th, 1983. It was directed by Don Weiss, who is not related to Robert Weiss, by the way. But Don Weiss, longtime TV director, and also happened to have directed 10 episodes of one of my favorite TV shows, the Jack Benny program.
Huh.
I know I'm showing my age, but there you got it. I did skip over who it was written by. And this is where it kind of gets a little bit confusing because I'll admit, I've been a little bit lazy.
Gasp.
I've been using Judith Moose's book, Steele Loved After All These Years, as my source for all this information.
Mm-hmm.
What I hadn't been doing was checking the actual episodes or the copies of the scripts that I have in my collection.
Right.
Now, based on the information that Judith had in her book, which I'm sure was based on the best information she had, it is listed as being written by Andrew Laskos and R.J. Stewart.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the actual episode credits, as you watch it, the story is credited to Peggy Goldman, Andrew Laskos, and R.J. Stewart. On the script that I have, which is it's dated about a month before it aired, because the script date was
January 5th, I think, or at least the copy I have.
Yes, January 5th. So it's a little over a month before it aired. You figure it took them a week to shoot it, maybe a week to post-produce it. So several weeks from the time that is dated on the script that we have until it was actually done. And when you look at that script, it lists Peggy Goldman as a participating writer.
Yep.
And Lee Zlotoff is credited as a writer underneath Andrew Laskos and R.J. Stewart.
Yep.
And of course, we know that you are a fan of Lee Zlotoff's work in this series so far.
Yeah, I think some of the stuff has been pretty good.
So the credits are a little bit confusing on the authorship of the episode. And I don't know if that's simply because of the way that the Writers Union has things categorized and broken down or what. So I'm going to try to make a better effort to check all the various sources for credits so that we can list everybody, or at least I can list everybody whose name I find as being somehow involved in the writing of it, not just from one source.
So I have a little tiny bit of knowledge in this, in the sense that other podcasts I've listened to have talked about script writing and the writer's room. And this is now, these were shows in the 90s. So maybe things were different in the 80s. But from what I learned from a couple of the other podcasts I've listened to, usually you'll have one writer who's sort of given the episode, but you'll still have writer's room meetings where they'll sit around and throw around ideas, and maybe other writers will contribute scenes or pieces of dialogue or something like that. And so oftentimes you'll have like the key writer will make the final pass, and or the creator, if the show creator is heavily involved, will make the final pass on the script and either punch up lines or update things or change things or whatever. But you'll still get that list of participating writers. So even when it's given one person, usually there's a bunch of other people that participated in creating that script.
And I imagine there's a lot of variables in that.
Mm-hmm.
Union rules, contracts, the way the writer's room is run, a whole variety of things. So
it probably also varies from show to show, but
yes, as I'm sure it does. So we're still going to continue to rely heavily on Judith's book because it is literally the Bible for this show. Well, okay, it's not the series Bible, but for fans, it is the Bible for this show. But I'm going to try and do a better job of checking other sources for these types of technical details. So there's that confession. Let's get into the episode synopsis, which I took from the original production synopsis. It seemed to work a little bit better for me. Annie Carpenter, a flower child holdover from the 60s, is upset about a missing friend. And Murphy, looking in on the matter, finds that he has a murder on his hands. Laura and Remington join him in the investigation, which leads to a campus ghost and alumni who years ago were involved in radical campus politics. Sounds exciting.
Yeah.
That was taken from Judith's book, which she includes all this information.
Yeah.
So
I would also add just a number of notable character actors. You've got Annie Potts, who was in Ghostbusters, Todd Sussman, who's been in a bunch of things, and Alice Beasley, who was in Moonlighting. So a couple of key people in the show that kind of went on to pop up in other places.
Mm-hmm.
It also, remember how we talked about your Steele the One for Me, the Rashomon effect, which is essentially from the film Rashomon, where you've got several people retelling an event from their point of view, and their point of view all differs slightly from everybody else's. This episode also kind of does that, right? You've got all these characters telling the story of what happened the night the ROTC building explosion, and each story has a different element to the plot. So I thought it was kind of interesting that pops up again.
Right. The slight variation to this versus what you were talking about in the traditional version of that is that in the traditional version, it's various people who witnessed the exact event from essentially the same perspective, but they're giving their own versions of it. Whereas in this one, we have various ones that know or don't know additional information that changes the story. So, we'll get there. Anyway, the episode begins, and it's night on a college campus, and in a courtyard, there's a banner that reads Homecoming Class of 73. And we see a man who we find out later is Dan Kowalski, desperately running.
Run, Dan.
And then we cut. And then we cut back and forth between shots of him running and a young woman who is, we find out later, Annie Carpenter, played by actress Annie Potts. And she is in the kitchen preparing a meal. And then we cut back to Dan running. And then we see Annie getting dressed in her 60s hippie style clothes. And then we see Dan running to a door that's locked and begins to yell for Annie. And then we cut and see the woman hearing the voice. Yeah. It's a voice. Is it in her head? Oh, no, it's outside. But she looks out the window and there's nothing there. Just an unoccupied campus courtyard. And then it cuts to a new scene, which is interesting because we've already kind of alluded to the fact that some things change between the scripts that we have and the final versions that we get. And this is a major change because in the original script that we have, it's a pickup basketball game. But in the episode, it's an arm wrestling match. And quite frankly, I got to say, Murphy looks a little bit outclassed.
Yeah.
He defeats the other guy.
I could definitely buy a basketball game, I think, a little bit more in this particular context, because what's supposed to happen in the script is that he's supposed to still be fit and in shape. And the guys he's playing basketball with are supposed to be sort of out of shape. They've let themselves go. And therefore, Murphy is winning. Mm-hmm. And here, you're right. Murphy is up against some much bigger men. And there's not really any other athleticism necessary other than pure arm strength. So I agree. I think Murphy is about outclassed.
Well, I did do just a tiny bit of research on arm wrestling, and it turns out that arm strength is not the only or perhaps not even the greater criteria in how to win. It's technique. And basically, it's not a matter of trying to push the other person's arm down, but pull their arm away from their body and then push it down. So conceivably, Murphy could win, but it's a tough imagine.
Yeah.
It's a tough imagine. So surprisingly, Murphy defeats the other guy, and then he can't get any takers. No. He wants to take somebody else on, but nobody will do it.
No, can you blame them?
Oh, no. Especially after he made probably the biggest guy there look like a 90-pound weakling.
They're like, thanks, dude. Bye.
Well, as he's trying to solicit challengers, the young woman we saw previously, Annie, comes running in, and it turns out that she's a chatty Cathy.
Oh, yeah.
And she goes on and starts with this somewhat coherent and yet somewhat incoherent story, and it just falls out of her mouth, and she's all over the place.
I love her. I personally love her. I think she's great. She's probably one of my favorite side characters so far. She's just so wacky.
Yeah. And she starts out about how great Murphy sweats.
Yeah.
And then she goes into, look, this isn't a good time, but Dan didn't show up, and I've been looking everywhere. And I mean, he screamed. I mean, I think it was a scream. He wasn't, it's just crazy.
Yeah. And then I remembered he worked for a detective named Remington somebody. Ouch.
And then, of course, Murphy finally gets a chance to get a word in edgewise, and he says, "Do I know you?" And she says, "You mean in the biblical sense, or just like names?" And I do have to say that James Reed does a good drunken act. I mean, we saw it previously with Laura.
Yeah, he does.
Or Stephanie. And James Reed does a good one here because it's very understated. It's, "Do I know you?" It's just a slight hiccup, burp, hesitation. Yeah, it's. We
never really do find out if they actually did sleep together. He keeps saying he doesn't remember, and she's.
Yeah, I think we do.
I don't know. I think that one's up in the air.
Well, I'm going to make an argument for it. I'm going to make an argument because at the next scene, they're at the door to Dan's apartment, and Nanny says it's not locked, and of course she says, "Well, what do you think that means?" And Murphy condescendingly says, "Yeah, it means it's not locked." And she says, "Hey, do you want us to make it again? Just for old time's sake? I mean, I'm open to it." And he says, "Again? Annie, we never."
Yeah.
So I think that's...
But he also doesn't remember who she is.
Unless he doesn't remember.
He doesn't remember who she is. So, and then he does say to Laura, he says, "Honestly, I don't remember." So... I don't know, maybe he was like a basketball Lothario. Maybe he got around.
Yeah, but does Murphy strike you as the love him and forget him kind of guy? I mean, he doesn't to me.
No, he doesn't. But he also admits to, he doesn't remember at all whether he slept with her. So, I don't know. Yeah, I'm leaving that one open to interpretation.
Okay. All right. Fine. I'll accept the stalemate on that one. Let's see. She's talking about how Dan didn't show up. She was supposed to fix him dinner, and he was supposed to be there, and he didn't show up. And when Murphy suggests that, well, maybe he just stood you up, she is offended.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it's in part because Murphy isn't believing her, but it's, I think, also in part just that she's offended at the idea that somebody would stand her up. And it's like, no, I would stand you up.
Yeah. I do like her line of, "I know my brain sometimes shakes loose from the space-time continuum."
Yeah, she's from another planet and hasn't been on this one since at least 1973, I'd say. And the other thing is that she makes a comment about, the line you said, "Breaks loose from space-time continuum, mouth gets a mind of its own. Coming here after 12 years at St. Amelia's School for Girls will do that to a person."
Yeah.
And that's a reference I want to come back to later because I'm a little confused about something.
I think I know what you're confused about.
But I just want...
We'll put a pin in that.
I just want to put a pin in it. Yes. So then she says she thinks it was Dan who she heard screaming, and scared is scared in any universe you want to pick. I almost said any verse you want to pick. Sorry, browncoats.
Yeah.
Murphy starts poking around, and while he goes one way, Annie starts wandering around the apartment in another way, and then Murphy hears her scream, and he runs to her. They look out the window, and they see a man. It's Dan. That rhymes. It's a man. It's Dan, hanging from a flagpole on a building across the courtyard.
Pretty dead.
Now, that flag is pretty far out from the building on that flagpole. And there's quite a distance between the flagpole and the window beneath it. So I don't think you can get to that flag and pull it in and wrap it around somebody's neck from below. And from above, it's still kind of a reach. How did they do that? Did they crawl out? I mean, that flag would have to be very, very abnormally long. I mean, usually flags have a given proportion that they fall in, or a range of proportions that they fall into. And in order for them to grab that and pull it back in and have enough length to do that and then wrap it around his neck before they toss him back, it just didn't look right to me.
Well, not only that, but spoilers, we know who the killer is, and she's about 120 pounds soaking wet. So how is she managing to carry a full-grown man and tie him to a flagpole? Like, there's no ledge, there's nothing to anchor her there. How is she managing to hold this person while tying him to the flag? Like, that would be difficult for anybody, much less somebody that small, and there being nothing to like hold on to or to kind of yeah.
The only way I could think of doing it would be reach out with something to grab the bottom of that flag, hope it's long enough to bring it inside the window, tie it around Dan's neck, and then toss him out. But yeah, it just doesn't seem to work for me. But we'll give him credit for trying.
I am amused by her line right before she finds the body, because he mentions calling campus police, and she says uniforms bring out the paranoid in her and that she's trying to work it out with her mailman, but it's just not working even when he wears his summer shorts. So I really hope that she is able to get past that. I don't know why that one caught me, but I giggled.
Okay, so after they find the body hanging from the flagpole, we jump to Steele's apartment, and he and Laura are getting ready to go join Murphy. And Steele begins waxing poetic about the painfully sweet memories of Cambridge, the ivied halls, the robed faculty, punting on the Thames, as if he attended.
Yeah.
And Laura makes a comment that comes back again later. Yeah. Cambridge is on the River Cam. Oxford is on the Thames. And he seems to act as if the difference and the details don't really matter. It's the education that one gets that's important.
Wouldn't he know that, though? He's British. Like, wouldn't he?
Yes.
I find that one hard to believe.
You would think.
That you wouldn't know simple basic geography.
Perhaps we can... Well, but it is higher education, and perhaps we can make the argument, create the scenario that for all his sophistication, it's somewhat self-taught.
True.
He's picked it up as he's gone through life, and he never really had any formal education, and details like this just never came into play before. You would think a con man would do a little bit better job of studying, but apparently he didn't.
I also would like to point out that in my notes, I wrote the exact same sentence you did. Mm-hmm. That Steele is waxing poetic about. I'm 100% serious. Word for word the same. So
it's like we're on the same wavelength. It's like we're psychotic.
Yeah. I'm not sure if that's something scary or
and I love Laura's rebuke. When Murphy called, he didn't exactly request you. And then Steele's attempt to save face. Well, Murphy never requests me. It's not in his nature.
And
the best part. Yeah, he may appear gruff and pungent at times, but underneath that, there's a growing respect.
Pungent?
Hello, self-delusion, calling Remington Steele.
Is he saying that Murphy smells?
No, well...
And
actually, now that you mention it,
that's it.
Or his attitude stinks?
Maybe, yeah.
I don't know.
But there is...
I hadn't thought of it that way, but you might be right.
It's just an odd word choice, is all I'm saying.
It is.
Interestingly enough, too, in the script, they're already in the car.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't look at that closely. But there's much. In fact, later on, there's even scenes that don't appear in the script that I have that appear in the episode. But I love the way they do the next bit, because Steele, of course, won't be deterred.
Yep.
Even though Laura's not buying it. He says, "You watch. We'll arrive. He'll look at you in that way he does and bid you welcome. Then he'll look across at me in the way he does, and he'll say," and then there's a hard cut. And what is he doing here?
What the hell is he doing here? It's a good transition. It is, and I wrote the same thing. A really good hard cut.
And of course, Steele just won't let it be.
No, he doesn't. He's really obnoxious here. He
just starts needling Murphy, and he won't stop.
Yep. Team of professionals. What profession did you have?
What professionals did you have in mind? Yeah, and that's rather harsh, isn't it? Considering you're the one that called for help, and called her, not you. What'd you expect me to do, Murphy? Throw him out of the car? You've had worse ideas. And Steele, he goes on, "I understood there was a death to investigate. There's no bloody weapon to examine, no hysterical witnesses to question, no suspicious characters to tail." And of course, Murphy has his usual speech about commonplace, the ordinary, and the mundane. And Steele kind of taunts him and says, "Yeah, give me the mundane." And hung from a flagpole. Can't think of anything more commonplace than that. Sarcasm. Table for one. Because, I
like that one.
Let's face it, that is not commonplace, ordinary, or mundane.
It's not. He's got him there. He's really got him there.
Yeah. Yes.
What's also interesting is that they're dressed almost identically here. They're both in jeans. They're both in, their shirts are different, but they have almost the exact same leather jacket on. And I don't know if that was intentional, if wardrobe was asleep at the wheel, or if it's sort of a subtle attempt to point out that they're not that different from one another now that he has a bit of experience under his belt. It's an odd choice, because usually they're dressed very differently.
Or it could just be Steele just, again, trying to needle Murphy.
Could be. Well, how would he know, though? He wouldn't really necessarily. It's not like he called him ahead of time. "Are you wearing the purple jacket? Good, I'll wear mine too."
No, you can't wear it. I'm wearing it. Yeah, and then, of course, Steele is... I don't know what he's thinking here, but he is definitely on his high horse, because it shouldn't be too hard to crack. Yeah. And then he bets them.
Murphy also threatens to hit him, though, twice.
Well, yeah.
"I'm going to hit him, Laura." And then in the script, he says it again. They cut it out of the actual airing, but oof. He's really gotten under his skin. Yeah,
he has. And like I said, Steele just showed up starting to needle him from the word go. You irritate somebody and they'll say something like that. He may not have actually done it unless he had the plausible deniability to do it.
Deniable plausibility.
Yeah. So, but if he found a situation where he could kind of justify it, he might have done it. And, "Oh, sorry about that. I didn't realize that was you, Steele." But yeah, you can understand how he'd get a little bit provoked. But then, like I said, Steele bets them that he can solve it before they can do it, which... Can we go back an episode to stop a Steele? It didn't work out there. They were both approaching the same case from two different angles, and they weren't sharing information, and it didn't work.
It didn't.
What? Didn't they learn anything?
Well, I think maybe he thought, because he was able to get as far as he did in the last case, that maybe that was an encouragement for him rather than a lesson, right? Maybe he was thinking, "Oh, well, I figured out half of the Considine situation, so clearly I must know what I'm doing at least a little bit," because he's all ego. He leads with his ego every single time. So this is not... Yeah. This is well in character, at least.
Well, there might be another T-shirt, "Leading with my ego."
Yeah, it guides him in all matters, pretty much.
Yeah, it's open mouth, insert foot, and then try to insert the other one is what he does. And then, of course, he he gets them to take the bet, and then he says, well, with a little bit of luck, I should be done in 3 hours. And then Murphy finally has the chance to stick it to him. And he says, well, why don't I give you something to start on? The building was locked up, tight as a drum. No locks were picked. No alarm set off. And the security guard came by every 15 minutes. And as far as I can tell, it was physically impossible to have gotten that body up there. Well, perhaps 4 hours just to be safe, eh?
I have an issue with the bet. I don't know if you caught this issue. He wants a weekend in Paris.
Mm-hmm.
That is
on the company's dime.
That is a dumb thing to ask for, and I'll tell you why. Okay, I have made a lot of trips to and from the UK from Ontario.
Okay,
it's a 7-hour flight, red-eye flight from Ontario, and that's if you get a direct flight, right? If you're lucky enough to get a direct flight, you fly from somewhere like LA. It's an 8-hour, 9-hour flight, and that's again if you get a direct flight, right? So you get there. You're already exhausted from jet lag, and I can tell you, and that's just for the UK. You got to go another hour to get to mainland Europe. So now you're jet lagged. You're 10 hours into a flight if you can get a direct one, and you're well. Let's see, it's 5 hours for me. They're 3, so you're 8 hours out of your time zone. Now, what are they going to do for a weekend? They're going to sleep, and then they're going to get right back on that plane and come back. So I don't know. I think he just should have stuck a little closer.
No, the weekend was in Paris. The weekend was in Paris, which means that they have to leave Friday morning to get to Paris so that they will be there Saturday and Sunday for the weekend, and then they fly back on Monday.
Yeah, but Friday you'd be in a plane for half of that time, and then trust me, you're not doing anything on Saturday. You are a zombie. By the time you regain enough of your faculties to even function on a human level, you're turning around to get back on the plane. He should have, I'm just saying, a little more thought, especially since he's even further away than I am. Like, it just wouldn't, dude, San Francisco, go with that, you know?
Okay. I'll have to trust you on that. I have never been to Paris. I have never been more than a couple of time zones out of where I live. And I have not left my state in 10 years. So
I can tell you that jet lag is no joke.
Okay. Yeah. I trust you on that one.
He'd be too tired to do anything that he wants to do.
And we'll just leave that at that. And then after the bet and after Murphy kind of sticks it to Steele, we have a time jump.
Yeah.
And it's now night, although it's not highlighted, but it is hinted at as we see through some of the windows. And it's Laura and Murphy working together again, just like old times. And I like their little exchanges. They're headed to Annie's apartment. Murphy's concerned about what if Steele actually wins. Yeah, it's a long shot, but still long shots come in from time to time. Not very often, but occasionally. And Laura says, well, look, I mean, he's out of our hair and we could get a year of his history to boot. And aren't you thirsty to know what Mr. Steele was doing? And curious, I'll give you. Thirsting? No.
This is the original thirst trap right there. But yeah, it's funny because even Murphy's tacit acknowledgement that it's a long shot, but it could happen, is essentially Murphy admitting that Steele has some skills. They may not be refined. They may not be.
Yes.
But he's essentially like, he's a little worried. Like, if he didn't think Steele was at least somewhat capable, he would be laughing along with Laura. But he's like, should we really have made that bet?
Of course, you could look at it another way, and that is that, as the old saying goes, and this is for people who lived prior to the digital age, even a stopped clock is right twice a day.
That's true.
Even if Steele didn't have any instincts whatsoever, it's possible he might accidentally, in spite of himself, come up with the correct answer. But no, I think you're right. I think it's more a matter of Murphy doesn't want to admit it, but yeah, Steele does sometimes seem to know what he's doing. Barely.
Yeah, I was going to say barely. Even Steele admits barely. Do you know it? Barely.
Yes, that's why I said that. So Murphy and Laura get into Annie's apartment and start talking to her. And I love this. Dan was the poet of my life. I'm sure he was very good.
No, he was
terrible.
Always mixing his metaphors.
Shards of styrofoam truth on the belly of a bottled dog. And then to see him hanging there like one of his poems.
Oof. And that is bad. That is bad poetry.
Yeah, but I like her description, hanging there like one of his poems. I mean, that tells you how bad his poems were.
Yep.
And then, of course, Murphy mentions that he was hung from the ROTC building, and then suddenly Annie comes back to planet Earth, sort of.
I have a question.
Okay.
What does ROTC stand for? Do you know? Because I couldn't find an answer to that.
Yes.
And I didn't go to a college in the U.S., so.
Yeah. Reserve Officers Training Corps. I actually did a little research on it.
So there was a military base on
No.
college?
Not exactly. Let me take just a couple minutes and hit a little bit of information about the ROTC that will answer that question.
Okay, yeah.
The concept of the ROTC in the U.S. began in 1862 with the Morrill Act, which established land grant colleges. And part of the federal government's requirements for these schools was that they include military tactics as part of the curriculum, forming what eventually became known as the ROTC.
Huh.
And in 1916, there was a provision to formally establish the ROTC as part of the National Defense Act. By the 1930s, there were ROTC programs in some of the larger high schools around the country. And then until the 1960s, many major universities required compulsory ROTC for all their male students. However, because of the protests that culminated in the opposition of the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War, compulsory ROTC was generally dropped in favor of voluntary programs. And in some cases, the ROTC was expelled entirely from the campus.
So that makes this episode make a lot more sense, because I knew they were protesting something, but I didn't know what. Like, I wasn't sure. Every time I've watched this, I've wondered, okay, why that building? Why is it so, like, that makes more sense. Because if they're protesting Vietnam, if they're protesting the war, if the revolution has to do with the military, then okay. Wow. Okay. Well, that would have been handy to know.
Because ROTC was basically the kind of I don't want to say a summer camp for people who had an interest in the military, but it was kind of like that.
I mean, we have like cadets here, which maybe might be similar, like Army cadets. And we do have a reserve, and you can join cadets through schools, although it's not like the way that you described it, where it was like they had to have a thing on the campus in order to, okay, yeah, I'm on board now. I didn't know what the revolution was about. I assumed it was loosely tied to Vietnam, but I was like not entirely sure how blowing up a building accomplished that. So I guess that kind of answers my question.
Well, there's a lot of people who asked that question during the 60s and 70s. How did blowing up that building accomplish anything? Yeah, peaceful protest by blowing things up. Let's think about that for a minute.
Fair.
But yeah, that was actually a fairly common thing, as I recall, was blowing up ROTC centers, the ROTC facilities on campuses, and that sort of thing. So yeah, recruiting centers for the military.
I assume the logic there would be that if they blow up the building, they can't recruit. But I mean, you could just recruit somewhere else, I suppose. Like,
yeah, it was a logic that was curious. I'll just leave it at that. Okay. Anyway, after Murphy mentions the ROTC building, Annie starts talking about Tom Donovan and the events of 10 years previous when Tom Donovan was killed. And she details how he was a member, and she was a member of a group of she details about how Tom and she and others were members of a revolutionary group, and they were supposed to break into the ROTC building, do a big number for homecoming, set off fireworks displays on the roof and all this other stuff. And it was supposed to be a stunt,
right? But
something went wrong. And instead of a fireworks display, there was an explosion and Tom was killed. So Murphy tries to reassure Annie that hey, if there's a connection, we'll find it. And then, of course, Laura asks about the whereabouts of the other members of the group. And Annie gives them the names of the other members of the group: Lynette Mercer, Hector Sanchez, and Nat Shavers. Not the Matt Shavers. Everybody in unison. Not the Matt Shavers. Nat. This is going to be a drinking game.
Isn't it Nat with an N?
Yes. Yeah. What did I say?
I thought you said Matt. I heard Matt. Okay.
No,
that was my brain.
I may be mumbling. I may be mumbling.
It's all good. I heard it wrong. Nat. Yeah.
It was Nat in my brain. It may have been Matt when it came out of my mouth, but it was Nat in my brain. So that's what counts. And of course, Annie says, well, he wasn't the Nat Shavers then. The legend sort of grew after he went naked across the White House lawn on top of a VW Bug. Was Nat Shavers the world's first streaker? I wonder. Or at least in recent times, may have been the first streaker.
He also wrote a book, Mr. Yippee Goes to Washington.
Yeah. To me, the word yippee means yippee. I couldn't figure out any other context for it beyond that.
I thought it was like, my assumption was that it was supposed to be, it should have been yuppie. And maybe he was making some sort of statement about, because that would have, I don't know, but yippee, I don't know. Maybe that's, again, something I can't clue into.
Yeah, yuppie's a word I'm familiar with. Yippee isn't another word I'm familiar with, but they don't have anything to do with each other as far as I can tell.
They don't really fit. No, they don't really fit the context. So I thought maybe that was another, I didn't understand because I was Canadian, so it's good to know that that's not that.
Well, all this is happening in Annie's apartment. Steele is in Dan's room, and he finds some books about the supernatural, books with titles such as Modern Haunting, Ghost Sightings of Yesteryear, Poltergeist, Fact and Fiction. And of course, while he's looking at these books, the front door suddenly slams on its own. Ooh, Steele tries to open it, but he can't. And then another door slams on its own, and Steele's starting to get nervous and a little bit concerned.
The light bursts.
So the lamps start to flicker and spark, and Steele enters the bathroom and finds what seems to be blood running from the faucets in the bathtub and in the sink. And then what appears to be a ghostly reflection in the vanity mirror. And when he turns to see if there's actually anybody behind him, the vanity explodes. Yeah.
This would scare the bejesus out of me. Like, this, I would pee myself. Like, this is terrifying. I am a horror movie fanatic, and this, I would be like, packing my bags, Laura, the bet's over, I'm going back to LA, have fun, and I'd be gone, So.
Well, it certainly is unusual, and it is certainly not mundane or ordinary.
No, it is not.
And then we see a jump to the reception where Laura is talking to the homecoming queen. Oh, okay. We find out that she's really not the airhead she presents herself as being here, but she sure comes off as being an airhead.
But we also know Laura is terrible at undercover. And again,
guess what I read in my notes?
This is another example.
Once again, we see that Laura is horrible at undercover work. There it is, right there in my notes. That same exact sentence. I mean, if you're going to pretend to be a grad student at a college, at least do the research to find out what their grad programs are so you can justify being there. Please.
Or don't pick something so obscure as Egyptology.
Yeah.
Pick something like medicine or law or something that would probably be at that college.
But Jillian seems to buy
English. Well, she says, we don't have one, do we? No, I'm transferring.
That's what I'm saying. She buys it. She buys this story. It hardly pays to work for a degree in a school that can't offer it. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
At that point, Jillian should have been suspicious.
Yeah, she should have been.
Well, as that's going on, Steele, of course, runs in, claiming to have solved the case. Poltergeist.
It's a ghost.
Yeah, and he does seem genuinely frightened, as you kind of alluded to, you would be. And he goes off spouting.
He's freaked out.
He spouts, The Uninvited, Ray Milland, Gail Russell, Paramount, 1944. And of course, Laura doesn't buy it. He's just up to his tricks to win.
She thinks so. And what's funny about this is if this episode had aired 2 years later, he could have referenced the movie Poltergeist.
Yeah.
Because it came out in 84.
Well, some TV shows, and Steele has done this before, seem to know things about things that are happening before they happen, even though they couldn't know about those things that were happening before they happened. Like in the pilot about stealing the jewels, the Royal Avulite, to finance the car company. Well, less than a year later, John DeLorean busted for trying to import cocaine to keep his car company afloat. They didn't know about it, but mean, it just seems like sometimes if you think about it, it happens.
Yeah, very true.
Well, and of course, when Laura doesn't believe him, Steele is a little bit hurt, and he says, how can you be so narrow-minded? Spirits have walked the earth since time immemorial. There's even a ghost in my own ancestral lineage. Phantom of the cinema?
That's a good one.
Yes.
It's a good, and it's funny because this whole bit that he goes into is not in the script. It cuts right to Murphy showing up, so...
Yeah, this is one of those.
I don't know if this was an ad lib or if this was.
No, I think this was just a major rewrite of the episode between the version that we have in our archives and this. But yeah, it's a great scene because he's talking about how his ancestor was a general at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. Well, he wasn't exactly a general; he was sort of pretending, and only to lure the French archers away when a wild arrow caught him in the chest, back.
He's making this up on the spot, but it's funny because this would have been the 100 Years' War, I believe. And
is he really making it up, though? Yeah. I mean, it's so absurd, and every time he opens his mouth, it gets worse. I mean, okay, he was pretending. Okay, he was shot. Okay, yeah, he was shot in the back, running away. This is not the sort of thing I think he would make up. I think that somewhere in his history... But he
doesn't know his heritage.
Well...
He doesn't know anything about his family. So how would he know his great ancestor? He doesn't even know his name. Kind of hard to... It's not like they had DNA... those DNA tests. It's not exactly like he
23andMe.
Send it out. 23andMe. That's what I was trying to think of the name of it. 23andMe.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, but... I guess now that you mention it, I'm kind of conflicted on this because this is not the kind of story that you would make up and keep opening your mouth and digging yourself into a hole deeper, knowingly digging yourself into a hole deeper if you were trying to convince somebody. I wouldn't think. But
I think he just really wants to get the hell out of Dodge.
Well, that's true.
I think he's freaked out.
That's true.
He wants to go. Like, he's like, solve the case. It's a ghost. Let's go. Although there is an interesting statement that he makes. He says, ghosts have stalked the earth since time immemorial. And I don't know if you know the origin of that phrase.
No.
But it has to do with, it's an indigenous phrase. Indigenous people often use this phrase to discover the temporal depth of their connections with their ancestral lands. So essentially it sounds at one and at the same time both grand and uncertain. It could mean thousands of years or as little as a few generations. And the Hiltsuk, I could be wrong about how I'm pronouncing that. I've part of my history degree was Indigenous studies, so
of course you know how to pronounce it, right?
Background here. No, yeah, I'm terrible at the pronunciations. I'm really bad. They were a seagoing people who made their home in British Columbia's central coast, and they've always maintained that they occupied the same place since beyond memory. And because their culture is one of oral history rather than written, that beyond memory stretches back. It doesn't have a beginning or an end. I don't think that was an intention. Like, I don't think the writers might have known that necessarily, but it's interesting because Steele is inventing this oral history off the top of his head. At least I think it is, or at least he's got this story in his back pocket to try to lure her out of there, right?
I'll grant you that. It's a story that he had handy, regardless of its origins.
Yeah. So I just thought that was kind of funny that they use that phrase. And then he's got this, quote, oral history because he doesn't have anything beyond memory. Mm-hmm. He has no knowledge of himself. So, yeah.
I mean, it could be that somebody is familiar with that phrase and that whole concept, and they did bring that into this.
I mean, maybe this was just a story he's heard of somebody else.
That could be
like
too.
A ghost story that he's heard, and he's using it for his own purposes.
Yes. Well, yeah, we wouldn't put it past him. Steele is still carrying on when Percy Winfield, who is the dean, comes up and greets Steele, calling him Professor Perkins, which is the name that is on Steele's name tag. And of course, this is a put up by Murphy to get Steele tied up and distracted from investigating the case, because Murphy told the dean, yes, that's the great Remington Steele. Again, with sarcasm quotes here. I've used those in the past. You're going to use them again.
Yep.
That's the great Remington Steele was working the case and somehow convinced the dean to engage Steele in a conversation and distract him, pull him away from
perfect.
Yes, it is. It's brilliant, actually. Very good, Murphy.
Yep.
Laura tells Murphy that Steele tried to convince her that a ghost did it. And she also says she hasn't come up with any information on Lynette, but Murphy says that Annie has a lead on Hector. So we jump to the library where Laura and Murphy go to meet Annie and Hector. And this is where you mentioned earlier, Laura tells Murphy, I keep getting the feeling from the way she acts that you and her were, and Murphy says, oh, no, I don't know.
Honestly, I don't know.
No clue. And Laura says, well, it must have been when you were going through one of your wild periods. And Murphy says, I didn't have any wild periods. Truth or fiction?
I gotta wonder, I'm assuming he's older than her, because later on when she's talking to Annie says something about that year, and she says, well, I was still in high school. So he must have stayed at Havenhurst, I guess, a little longer, because otherwise they would have missed each other.
Mm-hmm. But do you think Murphy never had any wild periods? Or do you think he's just kind of trying to shove that conversation off to the side because he doesn't want to get into it?
He was on the basketball team. College sports, I am given to understand in the United States, are a big deal.
Oh, that sounds so bigoted.
I mean, it's
nobody's ever heard of sports here.
You people televise your college sports. That's weird to me. I live in a university town, like the Western Mustangs. That's the American football team. Well, Canadian football, whatever. It's hand egg, the ball you throw and you catch and whatever. I couldn't tell you if they've won a game or if they even play. Like we don't watch that stuff. We don't care.
I don't either.
It's not like, but I mean, like, I have other friends in different states and they're like all into like, oh, Midwest University is playing this or Georgia's playing that. And I'm like, you guys care a lot about sports that aren't like franchise sports. If it's not hockey, I guess stereotypical, but if it's not hockey, I don't know what's going on. Like, and we invented basketball, okay? Canadian invented basketball, and I don't. So all I'm saying is that if it's a big deal, and Murphy was a basketball player on the basketball team, maybe he got a lot of women throwing themselves at him.
You know what they say about hockey, right?
That they're missing most of their teeth.
No,
it's true.
No, when people go to a hockey game, what they say is, I went to a fight and a hockey game broke out.
Yeah, that is also true. In fact, there used to be something known. There was a player named Gordie Howe, who's one of the most like decorated players in NHL history. He was also the oldest player in the NHL. Like, he played so long. I think he was in his 50s when he finally retired. And there's a running joke about a Gordie Howe hat trick, which is a goal, an assist, and a fight. Because usually those three, he would usually have those three in any given game that he would play. It would be a goal, an assist, and a fight. So, yeah.
Anyway, so Annie, Laura and Murphy meet with Annie, and Annie's taking them to meet with Hector. And I love her line. Could you go kind of easy? I mean, Hector's pretty weird. And it's like,
yeah.
Coming from Annie, that means a lot.
He is pretty weird.
Well, so is she, but yeah. And he's not just weird. He's stark, raving paranoid.
Oh, he's a nut. He's a nut. In the script, they cut this line out, but she says during Watergate, he was convinced his mother was an FBI agent.
No,
or was that in there?
That's in there,
I
yeah.
thought that one was cut.
But okay, now it's worse.
It's worse. I'm like, oof.
And
funny.
when Laura tries to shake his hand as a gesture of friendship and trust, that's how the feds get to you. A friendly handshake, the poison needle. You know, and I have to say, paranoia is the unwarranted or delusional belief that one is being persecuted or harassed or betrayed by others. But if it isn't unwarranted, if there's evidence to make that belief at least reasonable, is it still paranoia? Because, I mean, there have been stories, especially over the last couple of decades, about this very sort of thing. People getting jabbed with a needle and suddenly dropping dead because they were poisoned by some agent from some other country.
Well, there's that old story. It's only what is it? That old saying, it's not paranoia if they're really out to get you.
Yes. Yeah.
And here's what gets me. Laura says, like, you know, we work for Remington Steele. Surely you can find some reassurance in that reputation or whatever. I would think that would have the opposite effect, considering his vague CIA connections. Or his assumed CIA connections.
You're right. I mean, she could be relying on the fact that Remington Steele has a reputation for integrity. But yeah, you're right. For somebody like Hector, that would be a red flag. And of course, he kind of responds to that when he says that he'll trust them only if they can show him Remington Steele's birth certificate and fingerprints.
And his fingerprints.
To which Murphy says, I like this guy.
Oh, it's a good one from Murphy.
Yes. So they're starting to ask him about Tom and Dan, and Hector starts going off on ghosts. And of course, Laura and Murphy are just kind of jaw drop. And it's like poltergeist, disembodied spirits. Call them whatever you want. Yeah. And it's obvious that Laura's starting to have some doubts about her doubts.
Yeah.
You know, maybe Steele really was somehow on the right track, and Murphy says, don't even think of it.
Yeah. Which I don't think Laura was genuinely thinking maybe it's really a ghost, but I think that Laura was starting to think, oh, this wasn't something he made up out of the blue.
Right.
There's something there that he accidentally stumbled on.
Yeah. I don't think she was buying the ghost story literally, but certainly the standpoint that it was presenting as being a ghost.
Murphy just does not want Steele to be right in any way, shape, or form.
No, he doesn't want Steele to be right, and he doesn't want Steele to win the bet.
Of course. Although, again, given my issues with the whole plan of going to Paris, I think Murphy would be fine with it because they'd get there, they'd sleep, and they'd go home. So,
well, if he thought about it that way, yes, but he may not be thinking about that part. All he's thinking is Paris, Steele, Laura, city of romance. Not a good combination.
Yeah.
So Laura asks Hector about his version of that night 10 years prior, and he tells him. And as he's concluding his story, Annie screams, and Laura and Murphy turn to see what appears to be Tom Donovan's ghost, the very same thing that Steele saw reflecting in the mirror.
Ooh.
And of course, the ghost takes off with Murphy and Laura hot on its heels. And they chase the ghost into a janitor's closet where they find janitorial supplies.
Yep.
And I think Murphy's starting to lose it. He came in here, Laura. He came in here. We saw him. I mean, he's really...
he's upset.
I mean, it's almost like he's starting to go over the... Actually, both of them are starting to go over the edge just a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, they're both kind of... Again, can you blame them? That's creepy stuff.
I guess not really. Yeah, it would be unnerving. That's for sure.
Especially, like, coming from Steele, you can easily dismiss a ghost, right? But then you've got this guy, and granted, he is a conspiracy theorist, but you've got this stranger that you've literally just met saying, oh, it's a ghost. And then you see what looks to be a ghost. I mean, you put all those together and it would be unnerving.
If it looks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it must be a ghost.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyway, as Laura and Murphy are starting to panic and lose their nerve and their common sense, they hear Annie scream, and they run over and discover Hector has disappeared, leaving only his shoe behind.
Yeah. At first, I thought he was crushed. It looked like he was crushed under books or something, and I had to go back.
It kind of looked like that. Yeah, it kind of looked like that on first glance.
But he does turn up dead, so...
Yes. Yeah, so I think he was kidnapped at that point.
Right, okay.
So then we jump to an outdoor scene, and we discover that Murphy's attempts to divert Steele with entanglements with the dean is succeeding admirably. Kind of. It backfires.
Sort of.
So the dean and Steele have left the reception. They're out in the courtyard, and the dean is telling Steele about the previous trouble at the ROTC building from 10 years ago, the same incident that Annie and Hector had previously described to Laura and Murphy. And Steele makes a comment about Cambridge, and Dean says, "Oh, so you're a Cambridge man. Oh, what would you say you got from the experience?" And then, of course, this is where Steele parrots Laura's comment earlier about Cambridge being on the Cam and Oxford on the Thames. And Dean thinks it's brilliant, insightful.
Oh, yeah.
What a brilliant and succinct expression of the philosophical differences between the two. And it's like, he just said it, say something. He didn't even know what he was saying, really.
But anything that comes out of Remington Steele's mouth is brilliant, right? So...
Yes, of course.
Yeah, he was clearly... This is one of those, the curtains are blue statements that English teachers like to joke about. Because we teach literature and we pick it apart and we look at, poetry and ask the students to ask themselves, well, what did the author intend with this? And so there's a whole thing that I read once where it was like, the curtains are blue, and then somebody saying, oh, that symbolizes the author's mood and his depressive period that he was going through, and it's, this whole symbol, and then the author going, no, the curtains were just blue. Like, I didn't have anything that I was trying to say with that.
I was in the room and the curtains were blue. Make a mountain out of a molehill. Well, it's just a molehill.
Exactly. Yeah. This is the curtains were blue statement.
Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
Yep. Exactly.
So anyway, Steele starts asking more questions about the murder of Dan, which the dean insists be called a suicide since, as Murphy had previously stated, suicide isn't the greatest way to start off a homecoming, but it beats murder.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, as they continue walking, Steele spots an errant name tag on the ground. He stops and picks it up and slips it in his pocket. Put a pin in that. Dean continues telling about the discovery of Dan's body hanging from the flagpole, mentioning that he took out his flashlight and rushed over, and there it was. And Steele, for some reason, asks to borrow the dean's flashlight, which he is again carrying, and using it. Steele's looking around, and he spots the body hung by the neck from the same flagpole and asks the dean, your people didn't have any reason to put the body back, did they? 3 deaths in one episode, and we're only halfway there.
Yeah.
And of course, just as the dean is asking why, who could that be, Laura runs up and supplies the answer. It's Hector Sanchez.
Yeah.
Now, I have to call foul on that flashlight. It looks to me like a typical for the time, cheap, ever-ready incandescent flashlight, which
sure
wasn't much useful beyond a few feet. There is no way it could have lit up Hector's body hanging from a flagpole several stories up. When I was in the Air National Guard, I carried a 4-cell mag light with me, which is definitely more powerful than the flashlight that they show in this. And even a mag light wouldn't have done that.
So that's just your typical TV. Because anytime you see in TV when they light a match or a lighter or something like that, it brightens up the entire scene. And you're thinking to yourself, well, that wouldn't have happened. That's just a match. Interestingly, do you know what they call a flashlight in the UK?
Lantern. Or torch?
No, they call it a torch.
Okay.
Torch. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Which confuses the hell out of me when my husband refers to a torch. my daughter carrying around, because she's got a flashlight that is hers, and he'll be like, oh yeah, she's got a torch, and I'm like, you gave her what? Oh, flashlight.
What are we gonna do? We gonna march on the village and burn it down with our torches?
Right? Yeah.
Yes, colloquialisms.
Yep.
Anyway, the next day at Annie's apartment, Laura and Murphy are at odds.
Oh, yeah.
Murphy's incredulous. He is ranting. Laura is apparently freaked out by the case, and Murphy accuses her of basically grasping at straws. And his line is, I don't believe it. Coming from you of all people. I mean, he'll say anything, but you. And it's all down to the fact that Laura seems to be entertaining the possibility that Dan and Hector were killed by ghosts. And I have to disagree with what she says here. She says the present theory about poltergeists is that there's some sort of freak manifestation of human guilt, the guilt of someone living. And since all the victims participated in the ROTC break-in 10 years ago, maybe something has happened, requires them to get back together so it can work itself out. Except if we want to go to Wikipedia, which, to paraphrase Michael Scott of The Office, is the best thing ever because anyone in the world can write anything about anything, and therefore it's the best possible information.
Yeah.
According to Wikipedia, in ghost lore, a poltergeist is a type of ghost or spirit that is responsible for physical disturbances. It's a ghost of somebody dead, not the manifestation of guilt of the living. I'm just curious as to where she got that definition.
I don't know. I wondered that too. She says the present theory. So I'm wondering if that was what I'm wondering if that changed, if the definition changed, or if they just didn't do that much research and it suited the script to write it that way. I don't know. I wondered that too, because again, horror movie fan, I've seen all the poltergeist movies, including Poltergeist, and it's a ghost. It's definitely a ghost. Usually a ghost that died in some sort of violent way and it is therefore having to resolve its issues, which would make sense. If this was really a ghost, Tom Donovan would be the one responsible because he was murdered.
Yeah. And
right. So
the etymology of the word is that it comes from the German language words poltern, which means to make a sound or to rumble, and Geist, which means ghost or spirit, which means noisy ghost or rumble ghost or loud spirit. And according to Wikipedia, Michael Scott's favorite resource, they have traditionally been described as troublesome spirits who haunt a particular person instead of a specific location. So she's partially right in that the people involved are the focus of it, but the poltergeist itself, according to lore...
I don't know. I mean, in Harry Potter, Peeves the poltergeist was at Hogwarts. So...
But that was just his official title. He was titled by the University of Hogwarts, and they didn't have lords and ladies; they had poltergeists and whatever. I don't know. Never read it.
You've never read Harry Potter, have you?
No.
I can definitely.
Can you tell?
Yeah. No, he is literally a poltergeist in the series. He causes all sorts of trouble. He makes mischief, etc. It was just a joke, but he haunts the castle. He doesn't haunt anyone in specific. He haunts the castle.
Okay, well then that's not a poltergeist by definition here.
No.
But Murphy and Laura are still going at it, and Murphy, of course, in response to Laura's comment about everybody getting back together, says, "Well, they're not all together. Where's Nat? Where's Lynette?" And Laura says, "I'm just saying we can't rule out any possibilities." And Murphy says,
"She's right.
Please listen to yourself," because she's trying to consider the possibilities. And Murphy's looking at it from the standpoint of, let's not waste our time on possibilities that are remote. Like tomorrow, the moon may fall into the ocean. Yeah, it's a possibility, but the chances of it are pretty small. So let's focus on the things that are more likely.
I see where he's coming from. I don't know if she necessarily thinks, again, that there is a spirit per se, or that it's manifestation of human guilt or anything like that. I think she's just talking out what she knows, or what she thinks she knows about poltergeists, and trying to put the pieces together in some sort of way that's logical, because she is looking at, I'm looking at the facts at hand. Here are the facts at hand. We saw an image. We have 2 people now saying that there's a ghost or an apparition. We've seen things we can't explain. She's basically saying, make it make sense. And Murphy is sticking his fingers in his ears going, la, 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 la. I don't want to hear it, because anything that touches on that might indicate that Steele at least stumbled onto something that's kind of right. Or it just kind of doesn't fit with his worldview, which is fair. Like, it's totally fair to say, I don't believe in ghosts, therefore I'm not going to entertain this idea that it could be a ghost or that there could be something supernatural about this. Totally reasonable. But there's physical, like, they've seen something that they can't explain.
Well, I've seen vegetables talking on TV too, so
Veggie Tales.
Just because you see something and you accept that as the rational explanation doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's going to say, no, that's rational. You may just be nuts. But I think that's where Murphy's coming from it at.
Yeah. Fair.
So,
but Sherlock also said, like,
Yes.
When you eliminate all possible, was it Sherlock?
Yes.
Explanations, whatever remains must
That's
be
true.
the truth,
Yes.
right? And so Laura has eliminated so far all the rational explanations, and they're left with this, what looks to be a ghost.
Of course, the false premise of that statement from Sherlock Holmes is the notion that you can know and therefore eliminate all the possibilities, because there's always possibilities that you may not be aware of. But
true.
Anyway,
yeah.
Back into the episode. In this whole exchange, it's surprising that Space Cadet Annie is the voice of reason.
Oh,
she is the voice of reason.
Her line here.
That's scary.
Chef's kiss.
That's scary.
It's great.
She says, face it, you're scared. I'm scared. I mean, a trip like this, it would take a really extended human being not to be. And in walks Remington Steele, bright, chipper, full of joy. It's a wonderful day, isn't it?
Did you read what it said in the script to describe his entrance?
I did not know.
She says in a trip like this, it would take a really extended human not to be. And then it says, as if programmed by God, Remington sweeps into the room with the buoyancy and charm of your basic spring breeze.
Yeah. And I mean, that would fit the definition of an really extended human being as defined by Annie.
Yep.
La guerre est finie.
Yeah, the war is over.
And of course, Murphy is totally, he just is, not buying it.
If he were a cartoon, smoke would be coming out of his ears at this point. Like, if this were...
That is
he's just getting madder and madder.
That is a very good description of Murphy. Yes, absolutely. And then, of course, Steele double crosses them. And when Laura says a ghost, he says, don't be absurd. The murderer is of mortal flesh.
Which only makes him angrier because that means they agree.
And he doesn't want to agree.
No, he doesn't.
And of course, when Murphy challenges him for some sort of evidence to back it up, he says, well, I have the kind of evidence you slave for, Murphy. Solid, concrete, irrefutable. Not so much.
Yeah.
Because after Laura and Murphy walks out, he stalks out. Again, the smoke steaming from his ears.
Yeah.
Steele dismisses Laura. Did you catch that?
Yeah. Yeah, he does. He does.
And of course, after they're gone, Annie, of course, is enraptured, and this is where things start falling apart for Steele. And before we get there, a couple of side detours about Annie's conversation. She says, you have a powerful energy. I could really use some of that. And she wants a quick transfer of auras through the total union of our bodies and spirits, to which Steele replies, unfortunately, I have to go to Paris shortly. What did he think she meant by total union of our bodies and spirits? And how long did he think it was going to take?
Well,
I don't think he has that much stamina.
She was obviously... she's clearly propositioning him, and it's...
Absolutely.
Unfortunately.
Unless his flight leaves in 45 minutes, he has time.
His concept of time, though, given the fact that he wants a weekend in Paris from LA, is iffy.
Yeah, okay. I'll buy that. And then, of course, here's where it starts to fall apart for Steele. Annie asks if Steele really has figured out who killed Dan and Hector, and he pulls out the name tag that he found earlier and put it in his pocket, and the tag reading Tom Donovan. And he's been dead for 10 years. Are you sure? Do they know that?
Yeah, do they know that? Whoops.
And then we jump outside into a parking lot, and Laura's coming around the corner of a building, and she spots a balding man trying to break into her car with a coat hanger.
This is different in the script. She's being followed.
Okay.
Driving.
Like I said, I didn't look through the script in detail. I'm going to have to start doing that as I can get some time.
And he's following her in a Cadillac. She notices they pull off onto a dead end. She jumps out, heads into the campus on foot. The caddy pulls up. He gets out, and he's described as prematurely bald, pudgy, dressed in a three-piece suit, which the actor that they got to play him is not pudgy, but She walks quickly over her shoulder when she passes a garbage can. Stepping back, she pulls a soda bottle out of the top, continues on, and that's when she, puts the bottle up to the back of his.
Yeah. For younger people, first of all, yes, you could. It used to be possible to unlock a car door with a coat hanger, because that little post that you saw, that was the lock mechanism that you pulled on or pushed down to lock or unlock the door. It's not like modern cars. And yes, I think the glass bottle as a gun substitute would work, but it does have to be a glass bottle, because a plastic bottle just, first of all, it makes noise. And then second of all, it doesn't have the heft. So, yeah. Anyway, so the man manages to unlock the car door. He slips into the passenger seat and begins pawing through the glove box. And of course, this is when Laura sneaks up on him, shoves the bottle into his back, and tells him, "You so much as breathe funny and I'll use this." And Laura demands to know who he is, and he gives her the name Charles Ryder. But then when she demands to know why he was breaking into her car, he admits that before he became Charles Ryder, he was Nat Schaefer's, to which Laura says, and let's all say it in unison, "Not the Nat Shavers."
The Nat Shavers.
And then we jump to an outdoor cafe where Laura, Murphy, Annie, and Nat are at a table discussing his supposed exploits. But Annie just can't get over the fact that Nat no longer has all that great hair.
And his line about "it went the way of the peace sign, the sit-in, and Janis Joplin" is pretty funny. Mm-hmm. Janis Joplin, who is a member of the 27 Club.
Mm-hmm. You want to explain that for anybody who doesn't know?
Yeah, so the 27 Club, it's sort of a saying that references there was a large amount of musicians that have all died at the age of 27, which is it's just odd to have that many pass away at that specific age. You've got Janis Joplin, you've got Kurt Cobain, you've got Tupac, you've got Amy Winehouse.
Was Jimi Hendrix in that list?
Jimi Hendrix might have been, and I think, what's his face from The Doors?
Jim Morrison.
As well. Yeah. So yeah, just a lot of artists that died at the age of 27 for various reasons.
Well, that's when the contract with the devil to make them famous rock stars expires.
Exactly. They sold their soul.
Yeah.
He also mentions that that Life of a Fugitive is murder on the peptic ulcer. How many people this is the second ulcer we've seen in the show. Oof.
Yeah. And by 75, he knew more federal agents than Hoover did.
Yeah. By name.
Yeah. And then Laura asked him about being hooked up with the International Underground, which was reported of him, and him being in Munich and Belfast and Rome. And he says, "Do you have any idea how much it costs to get to Italy even then?" And how even if he could connect up with somebody, all they wanted was stereos and blue jeans.
Blue jeans, yeah. And it's interesting, his description of life, his wife's PTA speeches, his kids who think, "Hell no, we won't go," is what you say at bedtime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As someone who has a child with this philosophy, I feel that down to the corner of my soul. But this one I did know. This, like, the ROTC thing, it confused me, but I did know this one because we don't learn a lot about Vietnam in our history because we weren't involved. We sat that one out. But I do know that coming across the border to Canada was a good way to avoid the draft. So that part of it I'm aware of. The "hell no, we won't go," and yeah, so we were in Korea, but we sat out Vietnam.
So he makes a comment about how he changed his name and dropped back in, and as you alluded, he now sells time for an ad agency, and his wife makes him write all her PTA speeches and such. And he says that he was only back to drop in at the reunion, kind of stay in the background.
Yeah.
Because he thought it might be fun just to see what had become of everybody. But then he mentions Dan's room. And Murphy asks if he saw Donovan's supposed ghost. And he says, "I don't know what I saw, but it's got me popping tranquilizers like they were peanuts." And of course,
he's got some great lines. Like they wrote this character really well.
Yeah.
Him and Annie, like they're.
Yeah. And then Laura asks about the events of 10 years previous. And he tells a similar story to what Annie and Hector had told, except that he says it wasn't fireworks they were going to plant in the building. It was a bomb. And the plan was to blow the top off the building. And that Tom had lied to get Annie, Dan, and Hector to go along with it. But Annie doesn't believe him about the bomb. Nat says it's true, but it wasn't supposed to happen the way it happened. And
right. Yeah.
Then he says, but then again, according to my definition of reality, none of this, whatever this is supposed to be happening either. So Murphy says, let's go. Introduce me to this ghost.
Yeah, we got to see this ghost. Murphy is now at least on board enough to recognize that enough people have told the same story that there has to be something to it, even if it's not an actual ghost. Something's going on. So
yeah, and you're not going to convince Murphy that it's an actual ghost. He's going to firmly believe until he proves it that there's some mortal explanation for what's going on. And that's what we see next. There's another time jump. We see Steele entering what we soon learn is Dan's apartment. He crosses the room and at first sees nothing amiss, but then he spots something, bends down, pulls back the edge of the carpet from the bathroom door, which reveals a bundle of wires which come from underneath the carpet in the living room to go under the door and underneath the linoleum in the bathroom. And he enters the bathroom where we see Murphy arms deep into the opening for the previously exploded medicine cabinet, disassembling the ghost.
I would like to know if multiple people have seen this little display. Is she going back in and replacing like the medicine cabinet mirror and the lights and stuff every time? Because otherwise, like, Steele would have seen it first, and then the window or the mirror would be blown and the light would be like, is she doing that repeatedly?
You know, that kind of relates to the question that I had asked. I didn't ask myself that particular question, but I had written that if she's going to go in, or how I put it was, how did anyone manage to rig an entire room, pulling up the carpet and the linoleum, altering the plumbing, tearing out and reinstalling drywall without someone noticing?
Right? That's a lot.
It is. I mean, that's noisy. That's messy.
Yeah.
Somebody would have noticed. But apparently, no.
Not so much.
Not so much. And of course, Murphy, when he sees Steele walking in, taunts him. I thought you'd be on your way to Paris by now. And Steele deflects, saying that the murderer appeared to be more elusive than first anticipated. And who's that guy? And as he points to the figure bent over the bathtub. And Murphy says, well, that's Nat Shavers. And Steele says, and let's all say it in unison, not the Nat Shavers.
Not the Nat Shavers. Although I have to wonder, would Steele really know who he is? We don't even know if he was in the U.S. at that time, and it's not like the internet was a thing. I don't know. I wonder if a political revolutionary specific to U.S. politics and Vietnam would be something that everybody would be aware of.
Unless at some point in his life as a con and thief, he ran across something that had to do with Nat Shavers and stereos and blue jeans. I don't know.
That's true.
It seems unlikely. But we're going to create justifications for the holes in the stories.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Plugging holes in the plot since 1983.
Yes. Well, Murphy tells Steele that the whole room was rigged. He didn't know where it was being set off from, but there was got to be a master switch somewhere. And then as Murphy continues to dissect the ghost, another question here, teacher. Steele spots an earring inside the rubble at the bottom of the medicine cabinet opening. Who, other than the people on HGTV shows, wears full dress gown with dangling earrings to go do construction?
Well, I mean, I doubt she was wearing the dressing gown, but the earrings, that's not a bright idea to be doing that sort of work with dangling earrings. I agree. Especially earrings that look like they're like diamond.
Or some sort of crystal.
Potentially. Yes, they were clip-ons, because I went back to check, because then I thought, my initial thought was, did it fall out of her ear? Like, did her ear get ripped or something? And then I looked back and I'm like, no, it's a clip-on. So you're right. Maybe it was fake jewelry, but still, you wouldn't want to wear that when you're doing that kind of work.
No, it would get in the way. It's wouldn't stay on since it's a clip-on style. No,
it wouldn't. Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, so as Murphy continues to dissect the ghost and Steele spots the earring, Murphy asks what he found, and Steele snatches it away from Murphy's view, saying, find your own evidence. Obviously, he hasn't given up on the bet yet.
The line about, I knew I kept you on the payroll for some reason is also quite funny. Just digging in there, right? Just
these two guys have been going at it this whole episode. it's fun to watch. Murphy's getting
this
some
is why I wish they'd kept him.
Yes, he's getting some good punches in.
If they had kept him doing this, and here's a thought, a random thought that just occurred to me. Murphy is at his best when he's with Steele, not with Laura. They have their best sparring matches. They have their best back and forth. They have their best the mantle of Remington Steele. Like the comedy, I think, is at its best when he's with Steele, and I think when he's with Laura, that sometimes comes across in a way that's maybe less flattering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but here it's gold. It's just pure gold.
It is. It's a classic comedy team. Why would you break it up?
Yeah, right. Like, give them something to do.
Oh, anyway. Next, we jump over to Laura and Annie in Annie's apartment, and Annie's talking about her history. And she says she hitchhiked from Kansas City to Nepal. And Laura starts to ask, isn't there an ocean in between?
Yeah.
And of course,
a freighter.
Yeah, caught her right on a freighter. And Laura, somewhat in awe, says, "You really get around, don't you?" And I think it's genuine awe. Yeah,
she's. I don't think jealous, but maybe a little envious that she hasn't had as many life experiences as Annie has.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or wistful. Maybe envious is not even the right word. Like wistful. She hasn't traveled like that, or as Annie says, given peace a chance, or let herself get caught up in something.
Yeah. So, yeah, but yeah. I think Laura's sense of awe is genuine. She really maybe admires Annie from coming in off the spaceship and visiting all these places. But here's where we go back to one of the pins I said earlier. It says,
Yep.
She says, just since college, not that St. Amelia's School for Girls wasn't a good place to get started. And then here's where things also start going sideways.
I think it's St. Ignatius. The script says St. Ignatius, and that's what I heard, but
okay, I heard St. Amelia's.
You could be right, and I could just be, because I read the script, it could be superimposing, because they could have changed the name, and I could just be imagining things. But
yeah, shall we call it the novelization of the episode from Steele in Love does have it as St. Amelia's also. So,
okay. Huh.
And I believe that those are created from the episodes as they were aired. So I heard Amelia's, but regardless, it was a girls' school. And Annie says, everything that happened to me in those 4 years, and she just got done referencing St. Amelia's School for Girls. So you think, okay, everything that happened to me in those 4 years, but earlier she said 12 years at St. Amelia's. And if what she says that follows, what was going on at St. Amelia's School for Girls?
Well, there's that whole thing about girls' schools and experimenting in college, right? That's a whole. I mean, Alanis Morissette said it in her song, "You know how us Catholic girls can be."
Yeah, but if we go back to at this phrase here, when she talks about 4 years, and it seems to be talking about 4 years at St. Amelia's, you think, okay, high school, okay, that's okay, right. A lot of double entendres, many allusions there.
Yeah.
But then earlier she said 12 years at St. Amelia's. So
that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Especially since you would spend only, I guess, grade 8, kindergarten would be 9 years in elementary school. You wouldn't even have 12 years of elementary school.
Unless it was a school that was elementary, middle school, and high school all combined. But then why would you just refer to the 4 years if you were there for 12? Yeah, it's
well, I guess maybe those 4 years are your formative. You've hit puberty. I mean, she is tacitly. I'm wondering how this got past standards and practices, because I don't know if you noticed one of the other things that was changed in the script. Here's what I discovered when I was listening and watching it before I read the script, because I always watch the episode first and then I'll read it afterwards, right? When I was watching it, she says, I let Lou Andreas introduce me to my body. I gave peace a real chance, and I tried everything that looked interesting. The way she delivers the first part of that line makes it sound like she's saying, I let Luann Dreas introduced me to my body. So I was like, oh, is she saying that she had a lesbian experience? And then I looked at the script, and the script is Lou Andreas. So I was like, okay, no, maybe that's wrong. But then later in the script, she propositions Laura. She asks Laura to sleep with her the same way she did with Steele. So Laura politely declines. Obviously, that part was cut. Standards and practices probably didn't like that too much. But I wonder if the director subtly asked her to deliver the line of the name in a way that makes it sound like Lou could be Luann. And there's some plausible deniability.
Yeah. I just heard it as Lou Andreas, so I don't know. Yeah, she did pronounce it that way. Say it a little bit abnormally.
And honestly, that would be me grasping at straws, except in the script, a few minutes later, she propositions Laura. She says, we could try making it if you want to. And Laura says, making what? And she says, love. And then Laura, suddenly flustered, says, no, I don't think. I mean, thank you, but that's not. I mean, I'm not sure I'd. And then she said, just thought it might cheer us up, but we can throw the I Ching instead.
Yeah. I would imagine that if that one got to standards and practices, they would have kicked that whole thing back and said,
yeah. Which is why it didn't make it to the episode.
Yeah. And so
that's fair.
Even if it was Luann Dreas originally, it got changed because standards and practices suggested it. Suggested? Well, anyway, as they're talking, they hear a noise coming from the bedroom. And Laura moves over to the door and throws it open, and suddenly a figure dressed in black from head to toe bursts out of the room and rushes out the front door, followed by Laura and Annie. And they follow the figure outside, and at the same time, Murphy, Steele, and Nat Shavers are coming from the opposite direction, and Laura hollers, "Stop him!"
Yeah.
And of course, the entire group joins forces, chasing the figure past a life-size cutout of the smiling homecoming queen, and then past the kiosk, and then nothing. Can't find him.
Just disappears.
Yes, disappears. The group splits up, goes different directions. Steele walks off a few yards, and he's talking to Laura as he does it, and she doesn't answer. She's gone as well. So Steele starts calling out her name and trying to find her. And he steps behind the kiosk as Murphy, Nat, and Annie come running back, and he disappears. And this is a great line. Murphy calls out to Laura and Steele, and then he says, "I must really be scared. I'm actually calling for him."
For him.
Yes.
That delivery is good too.
So the good news is, of course, that Laura and Steele have not been kidnapped as Dan and Hector had been.
Yeah.
They're just in an underground passageway under the courtyard. And Laura says she noticed that one of the panels of the kiosk was just a little bit off. She got in, it snapped shut behind her and couldn't get out. And she asks Steele how he got in, and he says, "The Third Man, London Films, 1949. Orson Welles disappeared in sewers of Vienna through something very much like it."
Yep.
So there's our movie reference.
Yep. We also had The Uninvited.
Oh, yes. We had that too. Yes. So 2 movies. Woohoo. Have we ever had 3? I think we did.
Well, we've had a few where they've gone, like, run the gambit of movie references. This one's only got 2. 3, I guess, if you count the Rashomon effect, which isn't quite the same. So maybe not. But
yeah. Well, as they're down there, they realize that there's a network of tunnels that seem to run underneath the campus, and that there is probably a passageway that leads up into the ROTC building, which would alleviate the need to tamper with locks, alarms, or worry about the guards, making it possible to hang the body and nobody being seen. And it's also handy if somebody wanted to impersonate a ghost, because they could use the tunnels to make their sudden appearances and disappearances. And as they begin exploring, Laura graciously, put that in sarcasm quotes, lets Steele take the lead as they navigate through some of the narrower passages.
I get claustrophobic just watching this. Like, I'm not a claustrophobic person, but there's a couple of scenes that it's supposed to be romantic because they're pressed close together, and I'm just looking at it going, I would not, no, I'd not be going in there. I'd be like, you know what? You go ahead, report back to me. Not doing
I
it.
probably wouldn't be real comfortable in something like that, but it wouldn't be real. I wouldn't be terribly uncomfortable, but I wouldn't be very comfortable. What really gets me are the scenes looking down from heights, vertigo. I have trouble
fair enough.
a lot of times with even just seeing something on TV. It's like, no, let me know when it's over. So.
That scene in Dante's Peak, also a Pierce Brosnan movie, where he's in the mine shaft and he's almost crushed by the car. I can't watch that. It gets too close to him, and I'm just like, no. He wouldn't be able to breathe. There'd be no air. No, thank you.
Anyway, so as they're in one of those narrow passages that you alluded to, doing what you alluded to, we have a romantic moment as the result of Steele's belt loop getting caught on a nail as he's crawling through the shaft. And Laura has to, as you said, crawl up beside him, and they have to wrap their arms around one another for her to reach back and unhook Steele. And as I was watching this and writing my notes, I'm sorry, it just came to mind. Is this sort of the female version of a guy reaching around to unhook a woman's bra? I'm sorry. It just, honestly, as I was writing the notes, it came to me, and it's like, okay, I got to put that down.
Well, she is having trouble with it, and, it's not always as cut and dry as one might think, so.
So, as a result of this unexpected and somewhat weird intimacy of the moment, Steele suggests that they cancel the bet and simply award each other the prize. And Laura seems surprised. She says, "You'd willingly give me a year of your life?" And he says, sure, if it means getting a weekend with her, which, as you previously said, it probably isn't going to turn out to be much of a weekend. But I do have a question. Didn't he already have a weekend with her? Or was that with Myrtle Groggins?
He did. That was, yes. He screwed it up. He's looking for a repeat because that was a
do-over.
That was a mistake.
Do-over.
That was a mistake.
Yeah. But Laura turns the offer down, and she admits that Steele has presented an enjoyable challenge throughout the case. And she points out that he was the first one to discover the alleged ghost.
I think there's almost a bit of like a sexy element for her to this. Like that the intelligence, the fact that he's able to almost like present a challenge is somewhat, I think it's doing it for her. That's all I'm saying.
So she's more into the intellectual aspects of an individual rather than just merely the physical. Okay. Yeah. Could that be why Murphy never made the cut? That he doesn't?
Because they're always on the same page. She expects him to be. Mm-hmm. She expects him to be on that wavelength, whereas now Steele is proving himself, quote unquote, worthy. I think maybe it's a bit of a turn on.
Interesting. Well, they begin kissing, and of course they're interrupted by a noise.
Nobody's shooting at them, though.
No, nobody's shooting at them. No, that is true. But Steele tries to divert Laura's attention back to their current position, but he doesn't succeed. And they come out of the narrow passage. Yeah, they drop down into a more traditional tunnel, and he pulls out a lighter and strikes it to get a look at wherever they are. But whoever it is up ahead of them objects with bullets. Several of them, as a matter of fact. Laura and Steele hit the deck. Their assailant takes off. Well, Laura and Steele follow the assailant through the tunnels and up a ladder and find themselves in a women's dressing room. But none of the occupants admit to having seen anyone enter before them.
And this is another little spot where the script somewhat deviates, and I'm going to assume that this was a cost issue because they're going through the tunnels. And then there's a deep rumbling noise. Apparently, they go a few steps further where they see emerging from the darkness a huge water pipe that spans nearly the entire width of the tunnel, comes tumbling down towards them, picking up speed. Spinning around, they start to run as the pipe gains on them. This is like Indiana Jones, right? Mm-hmm. Steele suddenly loses his balance, falls. Laura spots a shallow indentation in the wall, pulls him up just as the pipe goes past and slams into the far wall with a deafening thud.
Save that for season 5.
Yeah, that seems like it was maybe too expensive to film.
Mm-hmm. I think that's also why at the beginning of the episode, they moved from the basketball court, which would have been an extraneous set or location. Yeah. That they were going to just use one time in the episode and moved it into the apartment, which could be redressed for Annie's apartment
they,
or Dan's apartment or whatever.
Definitely.
So yeah, cost factors. So after Laura and Steele can't find who they're chasing in the women's dressing room, and Steele takes a moment to appreciate the scenery.
He does, doesn't he? He has a good long glance back.
Yes. Carry on, ladies. Laura and Steele re-enter the tunnel and almost immediately hear footsteps approaching. And they begin chasing the footsteps and come up upon the final member of the ROTC bombing gang, Lynette Mercer. We jump to Annie's apartment where they're questioning Lynette. And she's telling her story about how after graduation, she left the country trying to get away as far as possible and was living austerely with the Courish Coutures and seeking wisdom. But she decided she needed to come back home and try to face the past. So she wired some friends for some money to get airfare and returned several months earlier. And when Laura asks for her version of the ROTC incident, things take an interesting turn because it wasn't just fireworks. It wasn't just a bomb to blow off the top of the building. She said Tom had brought a lot more explosives than he had told even her would be the case because his plan was to bring the building down on top of his dupes, Annie, Hector, and Nat.
And make them martyrs.
To his personal cause.
Oof.
Yep.
Yikes.
Great guy, huh? Yeah.
Yeah. Charming.
She said she thought about warning the others, but they worshipped him, and she realized they probably wouldn't believe her. And, I mean, after all, she does point out that even she hadn't realized how far gone Tom had gotten. And she had been idolizing him and loving him up to this point. So, she's got a point. They probably wouldn't have believed her. She also knew that if he didn't succeed that night, he would have tried again with another building and another set of unwitting victims. So she solved the problem by taking matters into her own hands. She knocked him out with a lamp, reset the timer on the explosives to 5 minutes to give herself and the rest of the group time to get out of the building. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Yep. It's pretty intense. Like she admits to being a murderer here.
Mm-hmm. And that's part of the reason why Steele pounces on her and her story. But once again, he starts beating around the bush with the wrong end of the stick because he accuses her of being obsessed by guilt to terrify and punish the people who caused her to murder the man she loved.
Yeah.
But of course, she denies having killed Dan or Hector and denies having taken shots at Laura and Steele.
Yeah.
Steele asks why she was in the tunnels, and she said, well, when she heard Dan was killed, that she thought she was the target.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Well, I guess she presumed that the killer had really bad eyesight and couldn't tell her from Dan. I mean, they don't really look a lot alike to me, but I guess in the dark, maybe. But she said that Tom had told her about the tunnels after he and his kid sister had discovered them one time when she had come for a visit. And so she went down there hoping to find out who it was that was doing all this additional murdering before they found her. And of course, Steele doesn't believe her, and he expects Laura to come to his rescue and fill in the holes in his theory.
Which she usually does.
And find the holes in Lynette's story. Well, there aren't any holes.
Like, I don't know. That's makes sense.
And she points out that no one knew the real truth of what happened. So the fact that Lynette was responsible for Tom's death wasn't anybody would have known, and so they had no motive.
Yeah.
Problem solved. Except for Steele, who, he's perplexed.
Yeah.
He wants to know who the murderer is, but Laura doesn't know. So then he fingers the earring that he had found previously in the rubble of the medicine cabinet. Odd place for it. And desperate to prove himself correct and win the bet, he makes one more attempt at trapping Lynette. And he says, these Courish Coutures you joined, austere people? Very. They live in the mountains of Afghanistan. And I suppose you have to give up all your worldly possessions, jewelry, that sort of thing. Why would I want to wear ridiculous sexist ornamentation?
Sexist ornamentation. I like that line. Because she says it with such sincerity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And to be fair, what she's wearing and the way she presents herself makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, she's very, I don't want to say plain, but simple.
Yeah.
In her dress. Yes. Well, the next day in the courtyard, Steele is wandering amongst the groups of students and happens upon another of the life-sized stand-ups of the homecoming queen.
There's something else I noticed, and I tried to figure this out, and I could be very off base, but given the bit that was cut with Annie propositioning Laura, I have a feeling that this was another thing they snuck under the standards and practices door without anybody noticing. The couple speaking French. I caught a few words because that's our second official language. We have to learn French from the first grade all the way up to grade 9. I am by no means good at French, but it sounded like, and I rewound it a few times trying to catch more of the conversation. Unfortunately, there was a lot going on, it sounds like the guy is propositioning his girlfriend for a threesome. He keeps saying certain phrases, and it sounds like the other girl's name is Nadine. Because he keeps mentioning Nadine in the I don't know if it's the same Nadine, but like if it is, that lady gets around. That might be something they snuck under the standards and practices door for there too.
Well, if it's in the background, they probably, and it wouldn't have been in the script, so yeah.
No, because it just says there's a couple speaking French. That's what it says in the script. Because when I was looking, I was like, oh, maybe this is going to answer my question. No, it did not. So.
But what they're saying, that wasn't in the script.
No.
But anyway, Laura and Murphy are looking through a photo album back in Annie's apartment. It's a photo album that she had shown them earlier. And when she had shown them the photo of Tom and his little sister talking about the tunnels and such. And Laura is convinced that the answer is here. They're looking at it. It's right here in front of us. Why can't we see it?
Yep.
And of course, as she flips through more pages, she does come back across that photo of Tom and his little sister. And the gears in Laura's brain start turning. And the tumblers start falling into place. And while all this is happening, back in the courtyard, Steele is staring at the stand-up of the homecoming queen with those distinctive earrings. And the gears in Steele's brain start turning and the tumblers start falling into place. Steele takes off running. And at the same time, Laura and Murphy run to the women's dressing room and find Tom Donovan's old jacket and a bag with a wig and a mask of Tom's face. And the same picture of Tom and his sister that they had seen in Annie's photo album. And everything comes together. She realizes that the suspect is Tom Donovan's sister, the beauty queen. The homecoming queen. So Laura and Murphy race out to the courtyard. They join Steele racing toward the podium, and they all shout, "It's her!" simultaneously.
It's her.
Now, later on, Steele rewrites this entire scenario.
Yeah,
and this entire scene.
I noticed that.
But as it actually happened, they all yell, "It's her!" at the same time.
And it seems like the way it was shot that they both came to the conclusion at this, like it was simultaneous.
Mm-hmm.
He's looking at the earring and she's figuring it out, and they're sort of coming to that. Yeah, he definitely rewrites this. Also, couch watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why even have furniture? Why? Why is it there?
I noted that in my notes too, but we haven't gotten there yet.
No. Okay.
We'll get to it. Anyway, they're running up toward the homecoming queen on the platform. She realizes the jig is up and tries to make a run for it. But of course, the trio arrives too quickly for her to escape. And then after Laura and Steele tackle her, they begin comparing notes, which they should have been doing from the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
The sister fills in the details of the motives, saying that she wasn't just his sister, that Tom had practically raised her when their parents had split. He was everything to her, and that somehow she knew that all of those other people had murdered him, and that her only regret was that she didn't get them all.
Psychosis runs in that family.
Yeah, yes. Crazy.
Because, like, Tom was willing to murder a whole bunch of people, and I guess so was Sis, you know?
Mm-hmm. And that comes back in at the end as well, too. But next, we are back in Steele's apartment. And as you said, they're on the floor, not on the couch. Apparently, as I have here, sitting on the couch just doesn't fit the mood.
Why even have furniture? Also, they're drinking. I thought they swore off that.
That was last episode. This doesn't count. Or there's 2 episodes ago. This doesn't count. Yeah. And of course, Laura sums up the case by saying something that you kind of alluded to there, that she really was, in a sense, Tom Donovan's ghost. Tom's original plan was to see them all killed, and that without knowing it, she was after the same thing.
What's also interesting about this is that this is one of the few cases where we're told afterwards what the motive was, right? But usually when we watch an episode where there's a whodunit, the villain is in the plot. They speak to the villain beforehand. They have maybe sometimes multiple interactions with the villain. We get to know the villain, or at least the whatever the persona is the villain is portraying. Literally, we know nothing about her except that one exchange that she has with Laura and all of the images of her that are interspersed throughout all of the scenes, the big cardboard cutouts. Mm-hmm. In a sense, she is essentially a poltergeist in that she's the living manifestation of all of their guilt.
Yeah.
Like Laura says, like she's there to punish them for what they did, and she doesn't need a personality. We know more about the people involved in the ROTC heist than we do. We almost know nothing about her except that Tom raised her and she wants revenge. That's it. That's all we ever get to know. Which is interesting because usually we know more about the villain. We get more from them.
Yeah. And when I was thinking about it, I realized that like you came to the conclusion of that she's almost not in the episode at all. And in fact, she's in the episode more as the life-size cardboard cutout than she is as a real person.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting presentation of the, there's kind of this thing in murder mysteries, especially TV murder mysteries, that the killer is either the most obvious person, the person who's in your face the most, or the person who is the very least involved in the story. And this takes that last one even further because
exactly.
Not only is she involved in the story the least, she's almost not even in the story.
She's almost not really even relevant to it.
Yes.
The story seems more centered on the other characters than it does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's kind of a unique way to do it, I think.
Yeah. I mean, that part of it was clever. There's some holes in the script, but that part was very clever and very well thought out and well done.
Yeah.
But Steele wonders, and I think you alluded to this earlier, how she managed to drag the bodies around. And Laura says, well, you know what they say about a woman obsessed. And he says, hell hath no fury like, no, that's a woman scorned. Or
that's a woman scorned.
Defeated.
Yeah.
And he's still trying to lay claim to the win, claiming that he was the first to properly identify the murderer, which, no.
I like his idea of a compromise, though.
Yes. Yes. A draw.
6 months of his life for one night of hers.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. I think that's fair.
Yeah. And then as he leans forward to kiss her, the lamp behind them flashes and then goes dark. And Laura says, your ancestral ghost? Steele says, well, if it is, good show, old boy.
That's good. And that was changed in the script too, because at the end of the episode they were driving in the Rabbit, and then again I'm guessing this was cost because this is crazy. A tire burst sending the car careening off the road. They crash basically because Laura had previously to this been saying if only we could find a deserted glade. They crash the car and then there's a deserted glade just there, and he says, dare we resist? And they break into laughter, which I think is ridiculous because, if my car was suddenly totaled, I would not be finding that funny. So this is a better ending. They chose the better option for sure.
That's why we have rewrites, folks.
Yeah.
Anyway, anything else to add?
No, I think we've covered it all pretty much. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we will remind everybody about the website, which is at www.SteeleWatching.com. And there you will find things like show notes and links to Amazon things like The Third Man and The Uninvited and a whole bunch of other stuff, such as
we've got t-shirts, we've got sweaters, we've got all sorts of things with fun slogans on them like plausible deniability, not deniable plausibility yet. He fit the suit, etc. We've also got Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all of the, and of course the Facebook group, Steele Watchers Facebook group, in addition to our Facebook page. So obviously the group being the place where we talk, chat, have questions, debate, all kinds of fun stuff.
So if you're not a member of that group, definitely head over to our website and you will find links for all of these things that we've mentioned there. You just have to click on it and you'll be taken magically through the wizardry of the internet to these places. So that's it. Next episode, season 1, episode 17, Steele Among the Living, wherein Laura reveals the truth about all her lovers.
The lovers. I love that one. I'm so excited.
Yes. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.